Hi, I'm Anime Jane. Kowloon Generic Romance is a seinen manga series, written and illustrated by Jun Mayuzuki, known for her previous work After the Rain. The genesis of the manga traces back to Mayuzuki's interest in the Kowloon Walled City, which she first encountered through the PlayStation 1 game Kowloon's Gate during her youth. The series began serialization in Shueisha's weekly Young Jump magazine on November 7, 2019, and has been compiled into 11 volumes as of April 2025. In October 2024, it was announced that Kowloon Generic Romance would receive an anime adaptation produced by Arvo Animation, which premiered on April 5, 2025. Additionally, a live-action film adaptation is scheduled for release in Japanese theatres this August. Folks, what began as a retro-futuristic romance has spiraled into a dystopian metaphysical labyrinth, for real. Set in a reimagined version of Kowloon, the story follows Reiko Kujirai, a real estate agent working at Wongloi Realty Company, and her colleague Hajime Kudo. Their interactions, marked by a blend of camaraderie and tension, gradually unveil deeper connections and mysteries, especially as Reiko encounters fragments of a past she cannot recall. This, in turn, leads the characters to uncover the dark truth behind Reiko and Kowloon. As the narrative progresses, it challenges viewers to consider: if our environment, memories, and even our sense of self are constructed, what does it mean to be truly real? Okay, let's dive in. Born from a jurisdictional loophole, a Chinese fort left unclaimed after Britain's 1898 lease of Hong Kong, Kowloon became a refuge for migrants and outcasts between the 50s and 70s. By its peak in the late 80s, over 33,000 people crammed into 6.4 acres, a space relatively smaller than a football field. Buildings leaned into each other, almost to the point of crashing, with sunlight rarely piercing the maze of dangling wires and dripping pipes. Residents transformed their apartments into workshops, producing plastic goods, textiles, and food items like fish balls. Dentists, mechanics, and tailors operated without licenses, relying on trust and word of mouth. Every inch of space was multifunctional. Bedrooms and alleyways doubled as storage rooms or production lines. Kowloon operated as its own microeconomy, thriving on improvisation and mutual dependence. But the lack of regulation had its consequences. Poor ventilation trapped toxic fumes, fires spread uncontrollably, and children navigated corridors littered with exposed wires. The Walled City was a community built on resilience, yet perpetually teetering on collapse. Its demolition in 1994 erased the physical structure, but its legacy as a symbol of anarchic adaptability endures. A legacy reimagined in Jun Mayuzuki's Kowloon Generic Romance. Kowloon Generic Romance reinterprets the Walled City not as history, but as a nostalgic fantasy. The anime presents a city bathed in perpetual twilight, adorned with retro neon signs and food stalls, populated by residents who seem to exist in a timeless, idyllic state. This portrayal lacks the grit and complexity of the actual Kowloon Walled City, which was known for its dense population, unregulated structures, and vibrant, albeit chaotic, community life. In the story, the Kowloon Walled City is no longer real. It was destroyed in the 1990s. What remains is a simulation, a digital reconstruction, where people unknowingly continue their lives as if nothing ever changed. They live out ordinary routines, unaware that their world is an artificial copy of a city that no longer exists. This sanitized version of Kowloon aligns with philosopher Jean Baudrillard's concept of the simulacrum. A simulacrum is a representation or imitation of a person, place, or thing that becomes more real to people than the original. Think of the virtual reality in The Matrix or Sword Art Online. Worlds so immersive and convincing that their inhabitants accept them as real, even though they are fabricated layers replacing true experience. Over time, the simulacrum doesn't just reflect reality, but replaces it entirely. The recreated Kowloon is not based on the real city, but on an idealized memory or fantasy of it. It resembles what people think Kowloon was, rather than what it truly ever was. Like a vintage-themed diner built in 2023, it captures the aesthetic of the 1950s, but it isn't modelled on any real diner. Or like the Paris-themed hotels and landmarks in Las Vegas, they mimic iconic places, but they don't reference any specific street or moment in Parisian history. They are copies of copies, not a replica of the past, but of our collective idea of the past. Kujirai clings to quirky habits, like eating watermelon while smoking, as expressions of individuality. But when her co-worker Kudo says, "Someone else used to do that," the moment fractures. The thing she thought made her unique is actually a recycled gesture. She's echoing someone else, her original. This is where Baudrillard's philosophy of simulacra becomes essential. Let's clarify the terms. A simulacrum, singular, is a copy of something. Early on, a simulacrum might still resemble the real, like the 50s diner. Simulacra, plural, refers to a stage where copies multiply, lose touch with any original, and begin replacing reality itself. The Matrix. Baudrillard describes 4 stages of simulation. How an image or representation transforms from something grounded in reality into something completely detached from it, eventually replacing reality altogether. First stage, a faithful copy, still grounded in the real. 2, a perversion of reality. 3, a pretended copy with no original. And 4, pure simulation, where the copy becomes reality and the original no longer matters. In this context, Reiko Kujirai is not a simulacrum of her past self. She is a simulacra. She's not just someone who looks like the original Kujirai. She is her replacement. The people around her treat her as if she's the same person, even though she's not. Her habits, her preferences, even her name are leftovers from the woman who came before her. But instead of questioning it, the world just moves on, accepting the copy as good enough. The original Kujirai is heavily implied to have died, possibly by unaliving, though the series leaves this ambiguous. What matters more is that her absence has been overwritten. The new Kujirai doesn't remember the past, but performs it through habits, speech patterns, aesthetics. Throughout the show, Kudo tries to pull at these old threads. He says things the original Reiko Kujirai used to say, hoping to spark recognition. At times, he gently guides her toward memories she doesn't know she has. But paradoxically, when she does remember something the original Kujirai would have known, he snaps. Angry, maybe even scared. Kudo's toxic push-pull behaviour feels emotionally messy on the surface, but there's a chance it hides something more calculated and nefarious. But that's a theory for another time. Baudrillard warns that when simulacra take over, even identity becomes simulation. Instead of being someone, you start to act like someone. You become a collection of habits, style choices, and roles you're supposed to fulfill. You're not a unique self anymore. You're a performance shaped by external expectations, memories, and cultural references. Kowloon Generic Romance takes this to its emotional peak. Kujirai is, quite literally, a copy reenacting the life of another copy, living in a copy, inside a story that you are consuming as a copy, adapted into an anime, discussed in a YouTube video. It's copies all around. The anime asks a harrowing question. If your environment is fake, your memories aren't yours, and your personality is stitched together from fragments of someone else. What makes you real? And even more daring, does choosing to believe in that identity make it real enough? Reiko Kujirai's struggle for identity is the emotional core of Kowloon Generic Romance. Her quirks, like pairing watermelon with cigarettes, are more than aesthetic flourishes. They're intuitive rituals, personal cues that help her piece together a self she can't fully remember. In a world where authenticity is elusive and reality itself may be artificial, these patterns become anchors. Indeed, when Kudo remarks, "Someone else used to say that," It doesn't just fracture her sense of originality, it also hints at a deeper continuity. Philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche came up with the concept of the Apollonian and the Dionysian to describe two opposing ways of engaging with the world. The Apollonian represents order, logic, and reason, while the Dionysian represents instinct, emotion, and chaos. Kujirai's journey falls into the latter. Rather than analysing her world rationally, she responds to emotional cues, recurring dreams, and aesthetic details, fragments of feeling that lead her inward. In a city where time loops and identity fractures, her personal rituals become a method of self-exploration. Author of the manga, Jun Mayuzuki, explains, "One big thing I want readers to get out of my works is the feeling of nostalgia. I want to confront that feeling and really face it and look at it." I actually interviewed a neuroscientist who studies neuroscience and psychiatry. They said that even in all their research, it's been difficult to answer the question of what nostalgia is and what type of emotion it is. Miyazuki's acknowledgement that science struggles to define nostalgia shapes Kowloon Generic Romance's core thesis. Nostalgia is both a psychological mystery and a storytelling tool. The anime frames nostalgia not as harmless longing, but as a systemic tool that comforts even as it controls. Its inherent ambiguity, part joy, part fantasy, is exploited to manipulate characters, turning nostalgia into an engine of social conditioning. The city's nostalgic veneer, golden hour lighting, retro storefronts, repetitive routines, is engineered to evoke familiarity. Kujirai and most of Kowloon's residents don't question their reality because it feels lived in, even when contradictions mount. But why do they accept it? For the same reasons we do. Who wouldn't crave steaming bowls of street food, the camaraderie of familiar faces, or the illusion of a simpler, safer life? These sensory comforts, delicious meals, cozy routines, a sense of belonging, are what make life worth living. This mirrors real-world applications of nostalgia. Political campaigns or retro revivals tap into longing for a sanitized past, one stripped of complexity and conflict. They sell a fantasy where things were better, leveraging the same triggers: comfort food, retro aesthetics, and promises of community. In the anime, nostalgia operates similarly. The city's designers, implied to be shadowy authorities, weaponize sentiment to maintain order. Residents accept their roles. Shopkeepers, neighbours, lovers, because the environment feels right, even as it erases their agency. Miyuki's role as antagonist sharpens this critique. His pursuit of the absolute, rigid, empirical truth exposes nostalgia's function as a social anesthetic. By saturating the environment with comforting illusions, the city suppresses dissent. Kujirai's attachment to her watermelon cigarette ritual epitomizes this. Her quirk feels authentic, but it's a programmed response to systemic conditioning. This is how Kowloon Generic Romance exploits the paradox of nostalgia, by trapping characters in cycles of repetition disguised as growth, but also trapping us, the audience, as the anime's romanticized depiction of a 90s urban aesthetic lulls viewers into a sense of familiarity, potentially obscuring the underlying truths the narrative seeks to reveal. Kujirai's conflict with Miyuki, the rational truth seeker determined to dismantle Kowloon's illusions, and Gwen, who struggles with mistrust, uncertain whether she's a clone or a fleshy hologram, forces her to confront her fractured identity. Yet when Miyuki hears her declare, "I've made up my mind to become my absolute self," he's more intrigued than afraid. Carl Jung's theory of individuation, the integration of conscious and unconscious selves, frames her journey. He writes, "The difference between the natural individuation process, which runs its course unconsciously, and the one which is consciously realized, is tremendous. In the second case, so much darkness comes to light that the personality is permeated with light, and consciousness necessarily gains in scope and insight. For Kujirai, becoming her absolute self is a conscious recognition of her shadow self, the repressed parts of her psyche she initially denies. The shadow, in Jungian terms, contains traits that conflict with one's self-image, reflected in how nearly everyone describes Kujirai B as the polar opposite of Kujirai A. When she declares, "I want to become my absolute self," she stops fleeing the shadow. Instead, she integrates it, confronting herself and bringing darkness to light, merging fractured parts into a cohesive whole. She tells Miyuki that she refuses to let go of the dream, even if she knows the truth. This is why Miyuki fixates on her. He recognizes someone striving to merge rationality and delusion, the Apollonian and the Dionysian, a balance he's rarely witnessed in anyone, let alone a clone. To him, she is on the path to becoming an enlightened being. The Walled City's legacy, both real and fictional, challenges us to confront our own relationship with truth. Kowloon Generic Romance feels eerily prescient in this weird era of deep fakes and aggressive algos. It asks, when the line between the real and the simulated blurs, do we fight for objective truth, redefine authenticity, or accept that identity is a mosaic of contradictions? The manga offers no easy answers, for now. But what do you think? We're approaching the final arc of the manga, and I gotta say, things are getting crazy. If you liked this video, smash that like button, subscribe, and hit the bell, as we'll be doing many more of these deep dives in the coming weeks. Thanks for watching. Toodaloo!